Hello class, and welcome to today's lecture on society, state, sovereignty, civil society, and governments. Next to the chapter of state, sovereignty, and society, where we'll be having a detailed discussion about what is state, what is the nation state system, how did we evolve or come up to state system, then what is civil society, and what is government and how it is formed, and what role does civil society plays for an in associating human being or in associating individuals with the proper functioning of state system. So first, let us talk about what do we understand by the state system or state or civil society is, see, why did we come up with such a concept of state? Why do we need an association called state to be living in? Because since the beginning, human beings have used to be living in associations, like in a groups. Even if you think about the nomads or the wanderers, they were still wandering in a group. So human is a social animal, and they want some company, group of company people, or rather, if we talk about, there has to be some system of means in order for them to run, in order for them to survive. So not just use alone could make things function. If there's an association, you could shift those things with somebody else, right? So since then, the human beings have been used to living in associations, and this associations is of two types. This is a voluntarily, that I wanted to be in this gang, or I was forced to be with this gang. So, example, uh, you voluntarily make friends, but you were forced to make friends for a group project. I hope you understood the difference, because you wanted the degree, and the group project could only be possible if you are making a good relationship with your group members who you don't know. So this here, at least you are having a peaceful, uh, peaceful but rather forceful but rather peaceful one. But if we take this concept to the society, the human beings are rather made to make friends or live in an association, either by their will, by their mercy, or in kinship lesson we have read about, right? So in historical evolution of state, so rather it was on basis of same ethnic lines or belonging to the same tribe, or it was a friendly association of where they thought, living in group, living in a community, they could use all the resources which makes them help their wants get done very successful and easily. So that is why we call it voluntary and involuntary or forceful association. And it is natural, so it is natural to have differences. Example, even though we live in a democratic country, it is natural to have differences between the government at the center. Every human being has got their own ideologies. They've got their own perspectives on the policies that these governments come up with, right? So there's a differences between my political views or differences between the your political views. So then the conflict and cooperation. So in that case, this conflict and cooperation is inevitable. So someone just texted that what chapter and all. This is after state organic theory, theory of origin of state. So I guess it's unit 4 or block 4 we call it. Yeah, block 4 lesson. I'm sorry, I've got multiple lessons to teach, so I don't remember lesson number. And conflict and cooperation is inevitable. Then let us understand what is meaning of state. You have to understand what is meaning of state. If you are writing an answer, you have to be very particular about writing definitions and giving in general explanation to it. So this, at least you have to do this as a uh, the graduate going to be a graduate from political studies. So science is the most important, sorry, state is the most important concept to the discipline of political science. So the main basis of political science was established on the notion of state system. Political science as a discipline exists just because the state system exists. You understood the relationship, right? A exists because of B only. So here B is what? Political science. Political science exists because of state system. So it is natural, necessary, and universal institutions. Some note, I hope you done with your Western political thought, uh, I need in the comments. So if you are done with your Western political thought, in that some political philosophers, they say state is a natural institutions, but some say state is an outcome of a human being wanting to make their life peaceful or wanting to have their natural rights satisfied without any disruptions. So some say state is a natural formation, some say do not state is not a natural formation. So if we take examples, for Plato, state has to be formed. So that is where the concept of philosopher king comes in. I hope you're all pretty okay with philosopher king Plato. But Aristotle says state is a natural institution and it's a family at large. Okay, but this Marxism says state is an outcome of class antagonisms and it will vanish once this class antagonisms or class wars have disappeared. So for them, state is a good institution. For some, state is an evil institution. So here we are talking about state as in general. We are not linking it to any of the political philosopher. So that is why we call it a necessary. Why? Because if it being a necessary, we would love to learn about the institutions around it, the communities that would mold around their civil laws, or how do I protect my rights in notion of state. So, but Aristotle, Aristotle says states comes into existence for the need of living and exists for the good life. So he gives a very good notion of state. So his state is, this is specially meant for human beings to live in because it gives me my rights. It gives me the properties, or it gives me the, it put up the laws so that I can fulfill my natural rights. So man needs states to satisfy his needs. But in absence of states, individual cannot rise his personality. So he gives a moral concept or states as a moral institution. So for Aristotle, state is a moral institution. I hope you're done with JSML. So if you're not done with JSML, then I'm not going there. But if you're done, we can go there. So yeah, but we'll continue this. So in absence of state, do drop in the chat box that if you're done with JSML or not, so that we can come back and discuss on it. So man need, in absence of state, individual cannot rise his property. Like he's a nomad. He's at always at risk. Example, Hobbes. Hobbes man is what? Hobbes man is constant war against his fellow human beings in order to survive. The survival is the main tactics for Hobbesman. So, in absence of state, it is a chaos. Society cannot be held together. And Machiavelli, Prince used stato, this word being used by the Machiavelli as a stato. So Machiavelli terms state as an authority which has powers of the man because due to the war or the rebellions between the church and the prince. So church and the state system. So he gives the state authority should be given, or the prince should be given the highest authority in the state, and church is subordinate, and church, or let's call religion. Religion should not play any role, but rather prince have to be smart, wicked, and etc. So Machiavelli in Prince used state O, which means authority, which has powers over the man. So he gives state the highest authority. I hope you have done with Western political thought. So I hope you are done with Western political thought. Then you'll understand what is state to Machiavelli, what is state to Hobbes. Otherwise, tell me. We can have it in the discussion at the end. So he gives scientific meaning to the state because he says state is not a divine institution. So state is something created by the man for his better living to satisfy his needs. So definition of the state. You have to remember this definition if you are writing an answer. So over a period, there have been a lot of definitions with changing centuries. They've been changing definitions because to one century there's been an aristocracy, one century there's been a monarchy, the other one was limited sovereignty or limited monarchy. Then the other times where it was democracy, the rule of majority. So Woodrow Wilson, he gives state is the people organized for the law within a defined territory. So state is what? Woodrow Wilson's definition of state is, suppose this is a defined territory and people living in my palm, suppose this is my the territory and people living in it organize it for the law so that my natural rights or my peaceful living should not be disturbed by my fellow human being or the fellow individuals. So in this definite territory, I'll make a law which is implemented only in this territory. So that's what Woodrow Wilson's meaning of state. Then coming to Lasky's meaning of state, he says state is territorial society divided into government subjects within allotted physical area and supremacy over all institutions. So his state is a territorial society which is divided into the government. So he gives division of state and society and government here. So this governments and subjects allotted in physical area and my state, Lasky state, he gave Lasky state the supremacy to be the highest standard over all the institutions that have been set up in the state. And Garner, so for Garner, state is a community of persons, more or less numerous, permanently occupying a definite portion of territory, independent or nearly. Like it could be either independent or limited independence and of external control. That I am the sovereign head. If I am supposed to be calling myself a state, I should not be exercised by law by any other sovereign of external countries and possessing an organized government to which the great body of inhabitants render their habitual obedience. I'll tell you in a common language. He says state is a territory which is containing a limited number, or he doesn't accept for the larger number of population. So with a limited or sufficient number of population who has control over themselves, and this territory need not be procured or held over by a sovereign of the other external region or external territory of which of my other state. And I this state has a government, and this government is formed by the people, and people are obedient. People show respect. People take commands from the government that they form. So he gives that gentle example, sorry, gentle definition of what state is. Then elements of state. This is an important, how do we define what is state and what is state system? So example, elements of state. So there are four elements of state: population, territory, government, and sovereignty. Please do remember what are four elements of the state. I mean, what four elements determine that there exists a state as an institution. So first one is population, second one is territory, the boundaries that the state has to be recognized, then the government because it is necessary for setting up institutions, and the sovereignty so that my authority could be within my territory itself. I am not being imposed by an authority of an outside agent. So population is what? Population are humans. So this basic human condition or the basic human need is what led to the establishment of state, right? So they are the most essential element and of state. So it is united by the condition of interdependence, consciousness of common interest, like people having common interest, near to common interest or common interest coming together, surrendering their rights. We are talking about Hobbes. So surrendering their rights to Hobbes, and they develop an absolute sovereign authority. So no limit on exact number among one. This population concept, population is necessary for state system to survive. But not all political philosophers has come up with their state has to maintain certain number of population. If they had come up with certain number of population to be considered as a state in today's world, then imagine imagine the state going by the rule of sanctioning state elated murders or something to reduce their population. So this could be seen if you know Dante's book, some comedy law something. I forgot the name. Sorry. So Dante's book also calls for the something same thing. No, like if there's a plague, this population need to be cut down, uh, and because the state can function properly if there are only superior population in it. This could also be seen in a book. Or it's an adopted movie, Dan Brown's movie, an adapted book also. In that, Angels, I don't remember the titles. So in that also you could be seeing they portray the Dante's notion of how to take steps to control the overpopulation. It's a darker chapter, so yeah. So no limit on exact number, but however, some philosopher, Western political philosophers come up with a magical number, and we don't know how. So let us understand how. So Plato fixed, I'm sorry for the spelling, Plato fixed 5040 as an ideal population. He came up with a fixed number, and that's interesting. That Plato, how did he come up with a fixed number? Although he says community of wives and property, and people, philosopher king shall not have this uh, family as an institution, but he also does not stop the community to be not procuring children. So he comes up with this magical number of 5040. But Aristotle gives a minimum range and the maximum range from 1000 to 1 lakh range. So population could be in between that. Then the state, it should be called as a state. And Rousseau also gives this number of 10,000. So Rousseau is nothing but Hobbes' headless Leviathan. So that's why, of course, there's nothing there's nothing astonishing that he came up with this magical number. So economic sufficiency. So economics of why did they come up with this magical number is when state is economically sufficient, it need not depend on the external uh, territories. It can use its natural resources as per the population's need. If natural resources are less, but the population is huge, then what happens? It will lead to like even doesn't matter if there's exists a state or there's exist no state. State institution has been set up so that because I will be having a peaceful living. So, but there are less natural resources and greater huge numbers of population, then how do I get represented in the state? So that's why they've come up with this magical number. Then overpopulated countries, this is an interesting one. So, but this was spoken in older days, but now if we consider this in recent times, but only like 50% of the better side we're talking about, these overpopulated countries are who? What are overpopulated countries now? Okay, overpopulated countries are India and China. So, what did India and China do? We have turned our population into a human resource, where the Western countries now are struggling to keep up with their population. Example, Japan. In Japan, the most of the population have become old. Now they are on a blink of disintegrating or blink of falling of economy. Also in China, the younger population range has fell down. So that because they followed one child policy for so long in order to stop population, now they have revived this one child policy. So this overpopulated countries in turn have turned this population into human resource. See, why do India has a better youth population now. That's why it's been seen as a rising third world nation. And we have changed this overpopulation kind of into a human resource. But there are negative debates to it because due to improper policy implementations or insufficient illiteracy increasing and health concerns rising. So that's a secondary one. But initially, if we talk about from the BC world perspective, this current overpopulated countries have used it as a human resource because we have huge population. We are making that population to work a lot and making them pay the taxes in return, etc. That is also debatable. So let's not get into debates, but imagine this in Western political world. So quality matters. Aristotle said quality of a human being, like character of the human being or citizen, supposed to be living in a state also matters. See, if I wanted my state to be a superior institution, if I wanted my state to a better characteristic institution, then my citizen has to be good. They has to be morally good. Example, J.S. Mill says, J.S. Mill, he opposed Bentham's utilitarianism and he says human being has to be living saintly. I mean, he has to project the saint behavior no matter in what society he lives. Then in a way that society could be turned into the saintly society. Saintly means they meant the morally good society. There's no worship, there's no disturbances. So Aristotle also gives this notion of morality and individuals to the state and individuals. So they wanted citizens to be good, which what makes the citizens, if citizens are being good, this is what makes the state to be a good institution. So then coming to territory, second most important one, territory is permanent residence of land in which they live in. So citizens, the population we have read about in the previous slide. So this the permanent residence of citizens that they live in is called territory. And earlier during nomadic tribes, they had no fixed territory because they were nomads. It's in the name itself. They've been following the shifting cultivation. They've been moving in search of food. Once the resources are done in the land they've settled in, then they used to move in packs to different places. So nomads and the Jews before 1948, before the two nation theory, so they had no state, so they could not be called as a people of certain state, or they are not been called as citizens. But states with natural boundaries. So we are talking about territory, right? So states with natural boundaries, mountains, sea coast, airspace, rivers, or secure state. Example, India. India is in the north, it's been bounded by Himalaya mountain ranges, all the mountain ranges. Then and on the Pakistan border, it's been done with the Indus River, Indus tributaries. And in the south, it's been surrounded by the water bodies. So we have sea route in the north, we have this mountain ranges, and the west we have this water body, and also there's an ample amount of air space, air region. So like this territory also makes a better states. That's why they proposed for natural boundaries are the greatest boundaries that a state could ever protect itself from. Then natural barriers. Why do we need them? Because to protect ourselves from an enemy state. That's a basic concept that state wanted to be. Main tactics is to survive and also protect the citizens. So then what is the government? Next, third important element. Government is an agency or a trust created for the purpose of exercising sovereignty. Suppose state is formed, it have a better territory, it have great population, it's got all the natural resources to survive or flourish or establish a better civilization. Then then what? People would be at constant war against each other, because it's the natural instinct of human beings to go to any extent to satisfy his needs, right? So but for them to be civilized human beings, for them to be following a civil law, we wanted government to be an agency, and for the purpose of exercising sovereignty. Because of this authority, there has to be an authority that should be looking after citizens if they are following the laws or not. So for that purpose, it is important one. Then there are various types of governments. You all know parliamentary, unitary, presidential, and federal systems. So then next, fourth one is sovereignty. Sovereignty is unique and distinguishable feature. It keeps changing from state to state. So sovereignty is what? Internally supreme and externally free from control. So that is why I'm sovereign of this land. So that is why it is called sovereign of this land. Otherwise, they suppose uh, during the colonial rule, the colonies have been exercised power by this European powers, right? So they were not the sovereign states then, but after decolonizations, they established their own governments. They established their own authority to look into the good being or proper functioning of the state. So sovereign is internally supreme, free from external control. And two types of sovereignty, internal sovereignty and external sovereignty. So internal sovereignty is a supreme power of state over its individuals and institutions inside the territory. This is an highest authority inside of the state. And it is not shared, and you cannot disobey it because you're a citizen. You give up your things in contract to be following a civil law. You have to follow civil law. You cannot disobey it. So, but external sovereignty is independence, unaffected by external authority. Like now, suppose USA or any superpower cannot come and exert their authority over us because we are independent sovereign country and we do not obey by their rules. So external sovereignty is independence unaffected by other state and external authority. Then only if any territory that satisfies population, territory, government, and sovereignty, then that could be called as an institution of state. Now let us understand rise and growth of modern nation state. State is defined as a nation state and it's a product of kinship. We have read this in historical evolution of nation state system. Then religion, property, war, technical development, and political consciousness. So these all things make the concept of state. These all things coming together and identifying themselves, we call it a state system. Then family, we call it a first institution because family gives what? It gives sense of belonging and order and security. So, but family in large, we call it a state system. So why do we want to live in a state system? Because we wanted to feel secure. We wanted to be morally obliged to it and follow civil law so that my freedom cannot be disrupted. So family is an institution small. If all families coming together, it's an institution at large. It's called state. So, but there are different forms of state. So earlier we have read about evolution of state, theories of evolution of state. Now we are talking about what is actual state is. How did it come up to this concept of modern state system? It did not bloom in over a day, right? So it came up with certain uh, kickbacks from various societies that they are formed in. So we'll be talking about tribal state, Greek state, which is Roman Empire, then feudal state and modern state system. See, we did not evolve in a single day to come up to modern nation state system, right? We evolved over a period through first installed tribal state, then the Greek city states have come up, then the feudal states have come up with the revolutions happening, constantly shifting powers between the classes and the increasing class antagonisms. We finally ended up with a modern nation state system that we today live in. So, what is tribal system? Tribal state is earliest formation because people with common interests, people of family, these tribes are basically the single family institutions. They have this common interest and they have a head, the tribal chief. So this head is an authority that makes the people, that makes the community to abide by his rules. And earliest form of organizations, the main thing that abide by them to rule is following commands or showing the obedience to the tribal chief. So it's basically small in size because people those days they lived in packs and nomads and primitive societies. There's no institution, proper institution, or there's no things like agriculture, settling agriculture. We had shifting agriculture, right? So smaller size, governed by chiefs and advisory council. These chiefs have like five or more 10 members in advisory council. So whatever they come up with, that's the final things. You cannot argue. Example, if we talk about chief means modern day example is Kap Panchayats. Not literal example, but I just wanted you to know that more or less similar to that. So I hope it's fine. Nomadic did not settle, it's in the name itself. They did not settle in definite areas, so did not have they whatever the portion they got settled, it was very little because They know once the resources are done, they have to move and shift. So this is the first state that's been ever formed. It's called tribal state. Who, what are the features? It's governed by chiefs, advisory council, it's smaller in size, and it's mainly based on the notion of command and obedience. So their only agenda is to preserve themselves and defense against war. So you might have got this question. You, as they are living in smaller packs, who they have to defend against? Is it animals or like what? They had to defend themselves against the another tribal state, the another tribes who's been headed by another tribe chief, another advisory council, another total community. They lived in packs with smaller population, right? So they had to protect themselves from the other tribes because suppose the area they have settled in had better resources, this tribe, the other tribe who wanted to get over that territory, they would wage wars. So in order to protect the single individuals, they formed an organization or an institution which is headed by chief, and chief will have the advisory councils, and the citizens or individuals who with common interests surrender their rights, and they command, uh, they obey the orders given by the higher command. And these are called pre-state societies, primitive societies. So actually, interestingly, Rousseau wanted the nation state system, modern system, to be going back to the primitive society. He romanticized this concept. I hope you have read Rousseau. So, Oriental state. What is Oriental state? Oriental state is now that population have increased, and they also increased in technologies in making agriculture or pottery, where everything having this invented. Then also new sources of natural bounties, example, warm climate, fertile soil, water, sunlight. Like, what do they need to have a better survival? Water, warm climate means the the crops grow very nicely, and the animal husbandry will flourish. So they accumulate wealth. They started to accumulate wealth to evolve in new social forms, social organizations. Now the class system has started to begin. Those who have physically strong and could be able to uphold or take control of the other human beings, they started to accumulate wealth. And now this class system has originated, led to the rich class and the laborers. So warm climates, fertile soil, and sunlight. These examples we can see in near Nile, Tigris, Euphrates, Egyptian Revolution, then Ganges, Yellow River, Yangtze are cradles of civilization. Right. The civilizations of the people have started to flourish around these rivers because water, it had water sources. Wherever there's a water body, there's a civilization existing. Example, Indus civilization, it flourished because of the rivers drying up, right? So once the rivers dry up, they move, they again settle in other society, other states, other territory. So, but if we talk about this Nile, Tigris, Euphrates, Ganges, these are all cradles of civilization because these are great water sources for food. Then they had great fertile soil, they can irrigate. Now that irrigation have become a constant thing, and these are almost like warm climate areas and abundant sunlight all over the year. So this prosperity led to art of war. As that now their survival, their food has been uh, fulfilled. Now they are left with what? They are left with, they have accumulated the territory. Now, as they have accumulated territory, their only agenda is to protect that territory now. Now the concept of art of war, then conquest of territories have started. So once they have settled, they have accumulated territory and found that there's been a threat or there's been a nearby state where there's a proper or better living. If we get those people into us, they could be helpful and be the laborers at cheaper cost. They could use it them to plow the field or irrigation. So that is what led for the conquest of territories, and prosperity led to war. So basically this Egypt, Tigris and Euphrates is Babylonian civilization. Then Assyria, India, and China, the civilization and the Chinese civilizations. All these things have led for the all these things have flourished. These are all Oriental states. They have flourished around a warm climate, fertile soil, and sunlight. Now let us talk about second state, Greek city-state. Location of Greece helped it evolve in a new form of people's mobility and political organization. Greece is at the tip of European plate, and it falls into the Mediterranean Sea, right? In near over there, the arch. So this perfect location, it connects this Eurasian plates. So this led for the people's mobility, and there's been an popular political organizations as it saw people from both the parts. So it led for the secular, and also its territory. It's guarded by the mountains on one side, sea, then secluded valleys. So this makes Greece as best state because it's secluded from every side, valleys on other side, mountains and sea road. So what we have read earlier, like right, the elements of the state. So in that it gives, if these are options that to be filled to be a proper state, then that state is ever flourishing. So that's why Greek best opportunity or best position. It's like the naturally bound territory or naturally bound for it to be a best state. So it organized the political organizations, different forms of government from democracy to despotism. So Greeks saw this various political organizations evolving, and it had undergone the various government that has been established from democracy to despotic rule, from people living in majority vote to this only single one ruler taking over the power, and people started to live in class antagonism has begun, etc. And relationship between the government and citizen also has evolved over the years. It either degraded or it either had a better opportunities. And population, of course, it has to be divided into free men and slaves because especially with accumulation of property, this got the society to be divided on the basis of wealth. And there are slaves. These slaves are who? These slaves got no citizenship. So they are not considered citizens. And now happens what? They cannot accumulate property. So now the free men only has rights. Now slaves will work for them. Now that free men are free, they started to focus on political organizations. They started to focus on making state system work. So city-states like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Argos, Thebes, and Attica are the famous city-states. And in Plato, we have read about Athens. Sorry, I did not teach Plato, but in Plato, you might have read about Athens and Sparta because the other city-states have formed a union coalition for the first time in order to stop the rise of powerful Athens. But Athens fell down due to the corruption, as it was democracy, and Plato did not like the democracy. So he says democracy leads to the corruption. So that's why this Sparta, as an example, he looks into. So then he created philosopher king rule is the best. So it is disintegrated due to natural rivalry and frequent of wars because there's the accumulation of wealth. When there's an accumulation of wealth, of course there has to be this class rivalries, right? There will be a sections of society who wants to protect their wealth. There will be other sections of society where they want to confiscate that property. So this natural rivalry and frequency of wars are quite common. Then external invasion from Macedonia and Rome was also rising. So this led to the fall of Greek city-state. And now let's talk about Roman world empire. So Roman world empire has been what? The political development stopped in the westward due to fall of Greek city-states because it was ever flourishing, and the people been living in an institutions have been morally abided by it, and there's been authority looking into them, but it stopped. The political development stopped when the Greek city state fell down, and Rome now has become the center of civilization because it has fusion of types of people and rigid structures. Institutions fell down and developed system of law. Here, monarchy is replaced by aristocracy, uh, and it led to the rise of vice and wealth. Population divided into rich and noble class and slaves. Power of aristocrats increased. Religion sanctions led to centralization and concentration of authority with emperor. So, if you have watched any Roman movie, Roman civilization related movie, you would definitely understand that people living in, you could see the class differences very perfectly. So what happened is political development stopped, and this institutions, government institutions, or authority institutions, which was run by people, so that their common interest would be fulfilled, have fell down, and this monarchy is replaced by aristocracy, rule in some cruel people. So who are these rise of wealth, wise and wealthy? These wise and wealthy people have started to replace the monarchy, and population definitely divided into rich, noble class, and slaves. So this power of aristocrats now has increased because there's no highest authority than them in the state to look into or to pass a civil law or any the law to keep their power intact. So as there was no authority, this power of aristocrats have increased. And also, cake cherry on the top is religious sanctions. These religious sanctions led to the centralization and concentration of authority with the emperor itself. So they have projected this divine origin theory where emperor is God sent. We have read it in the first class. Then individual rights. Here there are no individual rights. Freedom was suppressed and democracy and self-government disappeared because rule of aristocracy or rule of wise and wealthy have been installed, and institutions have been fell down. Now that led to the concept of rise of feudal states. So once the Roman Empire have declined, now that the central authority, like the aristocrats who were holding the power, now that it has eroded, this hierarchical political organizations with king as supreme, then supreme top, and serfs who are serfs like landless and the peasants at the bottom. This feudal class over smaller pockets enjoyed power and took major share of the production. So they, how did they take major share of production? They took major share of production because there are landless and peasants who worked for them. So they enjoyed this power, taking the major share of what they were working on. So the serfs who are landless, they worked in the land holders land, who are basically feudal lords, you should understand. Then exploiter and the exploited class concept have come into actual picture. Then church here emerged as a symbol of supreme authority. I'll explain how. Feudal state is what? The pockets of feuds, grabbing over some the group of peasants and the serfdoms, and taking majority of the share. These all things, these all people, they're established an authority of what? Established an authority of religion, of church as an highest authority that you cannot question them. You cannot question the church. What happens if you question the church? You'll be tagged as a sinner. So this church emerged as a supreme symbol of authority as there is nobody to question it, and this Pope established himself as the central authority of Holy Roman Empire. Then the Roman Empire came to be addressed as a Holy Roman Empire in the feudal state system. Now that it's a feudal state system, there's no democracy, there's no self-government, there's no proper, there's a slave system. The slaves are not even recognized as citizens. So, feudal state system is what? Rise of Holy Roman Empire. And the monarch was installed in 14th century. by challenging church authority. This was later. This was slowly the evolving. How did modern nation state system emerge? So also why? Due to industrialization in the 18th century, the feudal system dissolved because the mode of production has changed, and this the majority of share that they used to enjoy was literally cut down, and they were not having the benefits as they used to have earlier. So that's why industrialization led to the dissolution of feudal system, and this gave to the rise of modern nation state system. Modern nation state system is individual emerged, and he demanded greater freedom. Here new ideas and new conditions are encouraged, and nation state system has evolved. Now, what does this nation state system will have? Settled population, new interests around territory and ethnic lines, and they will have democracy, liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty. This will see a transition from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy. In nation state system, there existed absolute monarchy in the beginning, and it saw to a constitutional monarchy. Then, because of geographical discoveries also, and what led to the geographical discoveries? It led to industrial revolution because of availability of cheap and raw materials, cheap labor, and this led to the export import of cheap materials to the European nations. And this industries that have set up, they have been started producing massively and selling in the again third world countries. So they were getting a better price, like the higher, cheaper at cheaper rate, at cheaper production costs. Then resources of countries like Africa, Latin America, and Asia, they were all like literally exploited. We all know this decolonialism or colonialism. Then 20th century led to many world wars, also disintegration of European dominance. That's when the decolonization concept has started. And it's been also sanctioned by Trusteeship Council of United Nations that was specially formed to look into this decolonization issues. Then third world and developing nations emerged over a period. Then socialism, capitalism as an ideology. In in the lieu of stable nations, it led to the development of international law, organizations, and better relationships among nations. You can also call it a better relationships among nations. Also, you can call for greater tensions between the superpowers during the Cold War era. That's what we saw, right? But there still exists, yes, exploitation. There's no international space without exploitation, but they've given a new term to it. It's called neo-colonialism. Now that colonialism has been declared or has been opposed by many countries, this new term called new concept called neo-colonialism has started, where these powerful nations, they do not directly influence the political domination on the third country soil, but they show their domination in the form of trade and industries. So you are getting it right. Uh, the industry. It need not go to the soil and influence their political institutions. It could rather be done through trade. Like if you cut down my trade, I would definitely listen to you. So, or putting in sanctions on my trade, then I would come up with some peaceful terms where you could exert your power. So that's what neo-colonialism. Then why new human resources are available, the cheap labor, cheap raw materials, and economic exploitation of developing nations has been this victims of new colonialism. So this is a rather a complex issue of exploitation and injustice. So now let's talk about state and government. It is essential element of state. Then they are state is an essential element. Then state and government are not identical. You should be dividing state and government differently. They are not together. State is a wider, it represents everybody, institutions, but and more stable. But government is just a part or an agent inside of the state, which looks after the institutions like code of law, civil law, or executive, legislature, and judiciary. And government is an agency which is put up by the people. The government can be dissolved at any point of the time, but state is fixed, rigid. It cannot be dissolved. And this government will will have elected bodies, local institutions, offices. Then government is subordinate to the state. This is state, government is this. So it's government is subordinate to the state. Once the government vanishes, nothing happens to the state. State still stays intact. But the government is put up by the people so that this government will look into the election bodies or the institutions which will be helpful for the proper functioning of a citizen. Then state and civil society. Society is a complex, we know what is society, network of association of humans to fulfill their needs. And man exhibit political, economic, and social relationships in a society. So in a community that he lives in. So this community, he is abided by the civil law and lead a civilized cultural life. This is called civil society. A, soc- a place where human beings abide by the civil laws and lead a civilized and cultural life is called civil society. This is a definition of civil society. It only exists when citizens are conscious about their rights, they're conscious about their liberty, their duties, and the common interest that they have to satisfy. So it only exists when human being is ethically or morally supreme individual. Then it's an important organ in the society. It manages all the complex relations like uh, different opinions projected by the people, different religious people, ethnic on divided on the ethnic lines, divided on the ideological base, divided on the majority minority population. So all these things are woven into a concept of civil society. Civil society looks into it. So Cicero, he used the term civil society in first century. So it is a society where the members live together and citizens abide by its rules, by civil laws, by the laws that it projects it. So Locke also gave concept of civil society. His civil society is equal to political society because the people give up their rights, limited rights to this sovereign, where they want the sovereign to give back their rights so that which can protect their theory of natural rights like life, property, and liberty. So state set up a government for protection of the natural rights, then establishes discipline and order in the society. So as in state of nature, the discipline, order in society in some human beings cannot be visible. That is why all the human beings or all the individuals will surrender their rights to a sovereign, limited sovereign. It's not the absolute sovereign. So then Hegel gives a concept of civil society where it's an organization in which individual deal with all the individuals as a mean to serve his self-interest. I hope you have read Hegel. Otherwise, we can read about it next anytime if we are talking about civil society. So Hegel say civil society is an organization in which I as an individual will deal with the other individuals so that the other individual will serve as a means to my self-interest. This is an higher concept. Just have to understand this line. Then individuals tries to know each other like i- in a way that I wanted to satisfy my needs, but this could be pursued only through means of the other serving their self-interest. So in a way, I'll get to know what are the other individual self-interest, the other individual will also get to find out what are my individual self-interest. So in a way, you try to find out the interest of the other individual. So in such a way, you will have this bond. There exists a bond that you will create a bond. So this bond created is called a civil society. Then Karl Marx agreed to the Hegel civil society, but his civil society represents the state itself. But this was countered by Gramsci saying, in civil society or the state that of Marx, this economic power is in the hands of capitalist class. So it basically serves the interest of rich class only. It doesn't serve the interest of everybody else. That's a counter, but to Marx, civil society represents the state itself, and he's agreed to the Hegel civil society. It's an MCQ, please remember. Then Gramsci, he gives civil society as two levels of superstructure. First one is civil society, which is superstructure, which is near the base, and political society, which above exercise a control over all the society. Then it includes what? Police, judiciary, prisons, and it embodies structure of legitimization, political society structure of coercion. This gives the legitimate authority to exert power on this civil society. So these are structures of dominations and institutions of efficiency for capitalistic society. Civil society are basically the institutions which are used by this capitalist society to exert power. And the contemporary times, it is intermediate associations between the individual and society. It is a product of freedom of association. If you talk about civil society in recent times, these are basically the societies which are environmental bodies, or trade unions, or anything that will come up or associate together with similar interests and wanting to protect the similar interests. So, and then distinction between civil society and state is uniform, rigid, formal, and civil society is loose, informal, as it is involuntary. The voluntary interests of public are projected in that, and it can be dissolved at any point of time, whereas state is not dissolved, and it is legal authority. But civil society is moral values, my moral values, my ethical values, what inspires me to pursue my interests. So I voluntarily come and join a group. Then state, maintenance of law and order, and protection of citizens. And for civil society, they voluntarily take protection of common interest by mobilizing, pooling resources. That's what environmental groups example. Then significance, what is the significance in today's time? It is set of public interest organizations, demands on state, and it forms social movements. Then it protects freedom of citizens by acting as a counterweight to state power. If they seem to be like the state is acting anything that is against them, this civil society organizations will uh, form social movements or revolt against the state in order to uh, stop or overexerting its power. It's just a pushback on the state. State need not, of course, follow them, but some states will eventually listen to the civil society, because civil society is after all the voluntary organization by the citizen itself, right? So it installs habits of civic virtue, public spirit. It is regarded as central theme of democratic debate. Where there exists a civil society in a democracy, then it can exert or stop state from showing the coercive power. Then example, Poland leader Leash, he built up civil society. He said civil societies are parallel societies, and they consider both democratic struggle against authoritarianism. See, civil and glasnost is I'm giving an example. So it's an environmental group raised due to the issue of destruction of natural resources and political industrial. And if we talk about India, Narmada Bachao Andolan or Chipko movement, where Chipko movement is this stop the destruction of forests, right? So they also play other important role in education, health, human rights, ecology, gender, equality, and governance. So civil societies are basically nothing but these organizations which are formed by, as now we are living in a uh, modern nation state system with the democratic institutions. So how do we exert power on democratic institutions? By revolting against it, right? So these revolts are better done in a group or voluntary organizations where my interests are represented. So if they help the people form cooperation and break down social isolation. See, one single individuals, how far they can fight and get the recognition of state. So this people of similar interests come together, form a group, they cooperate among themselves. How the cooperation builds? They have similar interests. Their interest is to protect a single concept or single issue that's been going on, right? So they all their interests are to protect that or focus on that issue that has been going on. So that's why it's easy, and it gives citizens the habit of civil virtue. Then it gives public spirit. It is regarded as central theme. See, if the civil societies are functioning properly, how do the civil societies are established? Once your democracy has been flourishing and people are at liberty to exert their freedom of expression or thought, when they can voice over against uh, the government, then only they can establish this civil societies, right? So it's a central theme to democratic debate. Example, if they come up with any certain law, it's been called out by the people by forming a organization or a society of members with similar interests. Example, suppose CAA law. So it's been called out by the people who think that their interest has been violated by the government, or the chipko movement we call it, because they know that this destruction of forest would lead to their survival, would lead to their destruction of their life or basic needs. They started to revolt against it. So the civil society organizations are also basically, they could be called, example, hmm, the education or the gender equality, or when there's been an harassment or when there's been an death. So the Nirbhaya law, the civil society came together. They made their rallies and made the government to abide by it. So this, how do citizens mobilize themselves, is because when they are using their freedom of speech expression and they are at liberty to take up these issues. So if you got any doubts, you can talk about, you can ask in the comments. Otherwise, we can end. I hope I'm clear. So you got no doubts means, okay, I am leaving. Yeah. See you in next class.